This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
All right, let's dive into a mystery that's been around for centuries, the legend of Atlantis. We've had tons of requests to dig into this and figure out if it's fact or fiction.
What really gets me about Atlantis is that it's this image of a super advanced civilization that got swallowed up by the sea. But where did the story even begin?
Well, it all goes back to Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher. His works, Timaeus and Critias, are the only first-hand accounts of Atlantis.
Yeah, everything. All the theories and books and crazy ideas come from those two writings.
Like Plato just dropped this massive story and walked away, left everybody else trying to figure out what it all meant.
Exactly. And in Timaeus, Plato talks about Atlantis as this powerful empire with a huge navy. It was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most people think is the Strait of Gibraltar.
Oh, I see.
According to Plato, they tried to conquer Athens, but they failed. And then the whole island was sunk by the gods in just one day and night.
Whoa, what a dramatic ending. So we've got this advanced civilization wiped out by some huge disaster. It sounds like a total miss, right?
It does, but here's the thing. Plato wasn't trying to write some utopian fantasy.
Oh.
His Atlantis is more like a warning about what happens when you have too much ambition and let wealth and power corrupt you. It's like he's saying, look what happens when a society gets too greedy and powerful.
Right, he's using Atlantis as a way to talk about the problems of his own time.
Exactly. He's taking this wild story and using it to explore bigger ideas about human nature. Are we capable of being great? Or will we destroy ourselves? And this is what's really important as we go deeper into the Atlantis mystery.
I see what you mean. It's not just about finding a lost city.
It's about looking at ourselves and what we're capable of.
So we have this basic story from Plato, but then things get really interesting in the 19th century.
Yeah.
There's this guy, Ignatius Donnelly, and he basically turns Plato's story into a worldwide sensation with his book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. This guy connected Atlantis to everything. The biblical flood, the Garden of Eden, how civilizations started. He even said that all the advanced cultures came from this one place, which is an idea called diffusionism.
Donnelly's work, well, most experts today would say it's mostly speculation. But it does show how our ideas about the past are influenced by what's going on in our own time.
Interesting.
He was writing when people were going crazy for archaeology and anthropology, so his ideas really resonated. Everyone was obsessed with ancient civilizations.
Makes sense. And even though most experts think Donnelly's claims are a bit far-fetched, that idea of diffusionism, the idea that new ideas spread from one central point, it still affects how we think about history.
It's true, even if we don't realize it.
Like, how much of what we think we know about the past is based on these kinds of assumptions?
It's a great point, and something we should keep in mind as we look at all the different theories about Atlantis. But let's go back to the basics for a minute. Where exactly was Atlantis supposed to be? Plato gives a specific location, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, but that hasn't stopped people from finding Atlantis everywhere.
It's like a giant treasure hunt.
It is. But the funny thing is, a ton of the places people suggest are actually in or around the Mediterranean Sea. Places like Sardinia, Crete, Santorini.
Santorini, that's also known as Thera, right?
That's right. And then there's Sicily, Malta, even Troy. It makes you wonder, is there something about this area that makes it such a popular spot for Atlantis theories?
That's a good question.
Well, if you think about the geography and history of the Mediterranean, it kind of starts to make sense.
How so?
Remember that huge volcanic eruption that happened on Santorini or Thera around 1600 BC?
Yeah.
It was massive, caused huge tsunamis, and probably wiped out the Minoan civilization on Crete. It's totally possible that Plato, who lived way later, knew about this event.
Right.
So maybe that real-life disaster turned into the legend of Atlantis over time.
It's a pretty compelling theory. An actual historical event becoming this myth and legend that inspires Plato's Atlantis. It makes you wonder how many of our myths are based on real events.
For sure. It shows how stories can stick around for centuries and how real events can change into myths.
But not everyone believes in the Mediterranean theory, right?
Right. Some people are sticking with the Atlantic. They point to places like the Canary Islands, the Azores, or even land masses that sunk near the Strait of Gibraltar.
I see.
But here's where science gets in the way. Plate tectonics, which studies how the Earth's continents move over millions of years, says it's really unlikely that a huge continent sunk in the Atlantic.
So how do people who think Atlantis was in the Atlantic explain that? Seems like they'd need to get pretty creative to make those two ideas work together.
Exactly, and that's part of what makes the Atlantis debate so interesting.
It's this constant battle between myth and science.
Yes, we want to believe in the story, but then there's the evidence. It makes us ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go to make a story fit what we want to believe?
It's like we're solving a puzzle, but we might be missing some pieces.
That's a great way to put it.
So where does this leave us? Most experts today think Atlantis is a myth, a story Plato made up to make a point. But even if it's not a real place, does that mean the story has no value?
Definitely not. Even made-up stories can have truth in them.
Right.
Think about it. The Atlantis legend has been captivating people for ages. It shows how fascinated we are by lost civilizations, advanced technology, and the idea that there's knowledge hidden from us.
Yeah.
There's something about that story that speaks to us, regardless of whether it really happened.
Like we're searching for some part of ourselves that's missing, a connection to a past that we don't know what feels familiar.
Exactly.
And speaking of searching, that's what James Cameron does in this National Geographic documentary we have. He goes on a global quest for Atlantis, looking at different theories and potential locations.
Oh, I've seen that one.
He uses historical evidence and modern technology to try and find clues.
It brings up some really cool points, like those weird cart ruts they found on Malta.
Yeah, those are interesting.
They're ancient tracks carved into the rock, and they suggest that Malta was once way bigger.
You think those could be from a lost civilization? Maybe even Atlantis?
Maybe. And the documentary also talks about Sardinia. It has this unique geography, ancient towers, and even colorful rocks that kind of match what Plato described.
Right. It seems like every place they visit adds another piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
But instead of getting answers, we just end up with more questions.
It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion and just finding another onion underneath.
Totally. And then there's this thing with Tartessos.
Yeah.
There's this old Egyptian map, actually a copy of an even older one from the 2nd century, that puts a city called Tartessos, exactly where Atlantis is supposed to be.
Wow.
Beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And when the documentary crew goes there, they find these giant stone discs. Could be parts of an old temple or just millstones from the Roman times.
It's hard to say.
Every step forward just makes the mystery deeper.
But it's those clues that keep us hooked, right? We want to connect the dots to make sense of the past, even if we can't find all the answers.
Makes sense. So are we ready for part 2 of this deep dive? There's so much more to uncover.
Absolutely. Let's keep going. It's wild how, even after centuries, people are still so fascinated by Atlantis. I guess it shows how much we want to discover the secrets of the past, that there might still be mysteries out there just waiting to be solved.
You're right. It's like this massive puzzle with pieces scattered all over the world and throughout history.
Exactly.
And speaking of changing pictures, let's go back to that documentary. They had this really cool idea about Atlantis being this seafaring civilization. If they were as advanced as Plato said, wouldn't it make sense they traveled beyond their own island?
Totally. The documentary explores that in detail. They suggest that the Atlanteans were really good sailors and maybe even crossed the Atlantic, spreading their influence far and wide.
It's a pretty crazy idea.
It is, but it opens up so many possibilities when you try to figure out how ancient cultures might be connected.
For sure. And that takes us back to the Azores. They have those pyramid-shaped structures and those crazy tunnel systems.
Oh, yeah. The documentary team goes into some of those tunnels and finds evidence of ancient settlements and some artifacts that suggest a much more complex history than people thought.
Right. And the Azores are right in the middle of the Atlantic, which would make them a perfect stop for anyone sailing across the ocean.
Absolutely. Like a stepping stone between the old world and the new world. If Atlantis was real and they were great sailors, then the Azores would be a really important piece of the puzzle.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a minute. Let's say, just for fun, that Atlantis was real and they did sail across the Atlantic. Where else could they have gone? What other clues might we find out there?
That's the million-dollar question that sparked countless expeditions and theories. Some researchers point to similarities between ancient cultures on either side of the Atlantic. Stuff like architectural styles, religious symbols, even myths and legends that are similar.
Wait, are we talking about ancient aliens now?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
Haha, not necessarily aliens. But it is really interesting to think about the possibility that these cultures weren't as isolated as we think.
Right.
Maybe ancient people were way more connected than we realize.
Okay, let's stick to the facts for a second. What are some examples of these similarities that make researchers go, that's weird?
Well, look at the pyramids. Obviously, you have the Egyptian pyramids, but there are also pyramid-like structures in Mesoamerica.
Oh, yeah.
Some researchers say that even though they're thousands of miles apart, these structures might show a shared architectural style. Maybe that knowledge came from a civilization like Atlantis that spread its influence around the world.
That's kind of mind-blowing.
Right.
But wouldn't we have found more solid evidence of Atlantis by now? You'd think there would be more writings, artifacts, something that clearly connects these cultures together.
You would, but remember, Plato described the destruction of Atlantis as a total catastrophe. If the whole island sank, it's likely that most evidence of their civilization went down with it. Imagine the Titanic, but on a much, much larger scale. After centuries underwater, what would be left to find?
So we're stuck with these little clues and trying to put the puzzle together with what we have.
Pretty much. That's why the Atlantis debate never ends. There's just enough to keep us curious, but not enough to say for sure whether it existed or not.
It's that classic absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence thing. And it's that uncertainty that makes the Atlantis legend so captivating. There's always that voice in the back of your head saying, what if?
Exactly. And it speaks to how much we want to uncover the mysteries of the past and connect with civilizations that may have existed long before us.
Like we're looking for a piece of ourselves that's missing, a connection to a forgotten part of history. It's a really powerful idea.
You mentioned those rock carvings in Spain that show a person on a horse running away, the ones from the documentary. What do you think about those? Could they be more than just ancient art?
That's a good question. The carvings are definitely interesting, and they're right near where Atlantis is supposed to be, which just adds to the mystery.
Right.
Could they be some form of visual storytelling? A way for Atlantean refugees to record their history and warn people about what happens when you get too greedy and powerful.
Whoa, imagine that. They'd be sending a message through time saying, learn from our mistakes. It's kind of creepy when you think about it.
It really is. And it shows how even fictional stories can teach us important lessons that last for generations. Whether Atlantis was a real place or not, it teaches us about the rise and fall of civilizations, the dangers of power, and the importance of staying humble. Those are pretty universal truths. So, after looking at all this evidence, where do we stand? Is Atlantis a real place that's lost under the ocean, a myth, or a little bit of both?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? And in the end, we each have to decide for ourselves. We've explored the evidence from Plato's writings to Donnelly's theories, from the cool stuff in the documentary to the scientific evidence that challenges some of those ideas. We've looked at potential locations in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, and we've even thought about the possibility of Atlantis being this seafaring civilization. But the truth is, the mystery of Atlantis is still unsolved.
So what now? Where do WE, or rather our listeners, go from here?
Yeah.
What are some things they should think about as they explore the Atlantis mystery on their own?
Here's something to consider. If Atlantis did de-exist, how would finding it change how we understand history, technology, even our place in the universe? Would it change how we see ourselves and where we fit in the grand scheme of things? And how might the legend of Atlantis continue to inspire art, literature, and scientific exploration in the future?
Those are some big questions, and there aren't any easy answers. But that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. The mystery of Atlantis keeps challenging us, making us think critically, and pushing the limits of what we think we know about the past. So, to all you explorers out there, keep searching, keep questioning, and keep an open mind. You never know what you might find.
And, as always, stay curious. That's what makes us human, after all.
We've been on quite a journey exploring the mysteries of Atlantis. From Plato's stories to Donnelly's wild theories, we even joined James Cameron on his global search.
At least virtually.
Haha, exactly. But there's this one thing about the whole Atlantis idea that really sticks with me.
What's that?
This thought that somewhere, maybe under the ocean or buried deep underground, there's this whole other part of human history just waiting to be found. It's kind of exciting, but also a little scary, don't you think?
Totally. It's like the idea of Atlantis, or any lost civilization for that matter, really taps into our fascination with the unknown. The fact that knowledge can just disappear. That entire civilizations can vanish. And that maybe we have no idea how much we don't know about what came before us.
It's like we're standing on the edge of this huge unexplored ocean. We know there are incredible things hidden down there, but all we have are these old maps and stories to guide us.
I like that analogy.
What if Atlantis isn't just one lost city, but represents all the knowledge and wisdom that's been lost throughout history?
Wow.
Like, what if we're all living on top of the ruins of countless Atlantises, each with its own stories and lessons?
That's a really profound thought. And it makes us rethink how we see the past.
Yeah.
It suggests that history isn't just a straight line from point A to point B, but more like a tapestry woven from tons of different threads. And a lot of those threads have gotten lost over time.
So maybe the real treasure isn't finding a physical Atlantis, but finding that lost knowledge and wisdom again, within ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly.
Okay, so how can we apply this Atlantis mindset to our own lives? How can we become better explorers, not just of the world, but of ourselves?
It starts with being curious, with questioning what we think we know, and being open to new ideas.
Makes sense.
We have to realize that history isn't just facts, it's stories and interpretations, each with its own perspective and maybe even some bias.
Right.
We have to be comfortable with not knowing everything and understand that the journey is just as important as the destination.
So instead of searching for a real Atlantis, we should be looking for the Atlantis within.
That's a great way to put it.
That spark of curiosity, the thirst for knowledge, that drive to discover what's hidden, both in the world and in ourselves.
Exactly. And remember, Plato's Atlantis was a warning about power and greed, but it also hinted at the amazing things humans can achieve. It reminds us that we can do incredible things, but that we need to use our knowledge and power wisely.
It's a reminder that we can create and destroy. The choices we make today are what shape tomorrow. We could build our own Atlantises, societies full of wisdom, compassion, and innovation. But we could also make the same mistakes as those before us.
Let greed and ambition cloud our judgment and lead us down a path of self-destruction.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from the Atlantis story. It makes us think about our choices, our values, and what we want to leave behind for others. What will people remember about our Atlantis?
That's a question we all need to ask ourselves.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Atlantis, I want to leave you with this. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that curiosity alive. The world is full of mysteries, ancient and modern, just waiting to be discovered. You never know, maybe you'll be the one to finally figure out the Atlantis riddle, or maybe you'll discover something even more amazing along the way.
The most important thing is to stay curious. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.